Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, it's day 3 of the Literary Festival, and welcome along to a particularly interesting chat we're going to have with Neil Laughton. And Neil actually shouldn't be here. As far as I've read in his book, his 9 lives were used up ages ago, and his 50 expeditions across all 7 continents. A former Royal Marines Commando, helicopter pilot, Special Forces officer, he's also an entrepreneur, founding a dozen businesses, 2 of which were sold on the FTSE 100. Please welcome Adventureholic, Neil Laughton. Well done, Neil.
Hi, Steve. Thanks everybody for coming.
The book, fascinating read, nice layout, and what I particularly liked was that you, at the end of each chapter, there's a lessons learned. We'll go on to that in a minute, but first of all, I think the opening paragraph says the definition of an adventure. What is it?
Well, I think the definition of an adventure to me, I'm going to steal it slightly from the internet, but I concur with it. It says an unusual, exciting, or daring experience or experiences. Is that good enough for you?
It is, yes. Well, you've certainly done that. Let's mention about the lessons learned, because as I say, at the end of each chapter, you review what happened, a little bit military style, but you actually, analyse what happens. What brought that about?
Well, I think first of all, the book is a compilation of 40 years of adventure, unusual, exciting and daring expeditions around the world, 7 continents by land, sea and air. And I've picked all the best ones, obviously. And what I wanted to do was it to be, before I went senile, to record all these amazing, extraordinary journeys. Secondly, I'm big about, particularly for the younger generation, empowering and encouraging and inspiring them to be more adventurous generally in life and to make most of their opportunities that we get given, but also to share the learnings and to share what, including the mistakes that I've made, but also I think from an adventurous perspective, there's a lot of young people particularly, and everybody here I'm sure has been on expeditions, and particularly those people who are starting out. How do you dream up these things? How do you get it sponsored? How do you find teammates to join you on these expeditions? And how do you stay alive? And how do you lead if you're lucky enough to have the opportunity to lead the trips? And so I think to answer your question, I think it's important to share all of that fairly honestly, but also give people steers and tips on what went well, what went wrong.
Leadership.
Yeah.
Okay, you and the Everest seem to have a history which goes back right to the beginning.
Yeah, so kind of generally the stories that I've included in the book can be summarized into sort of 3 main categories. So we've got land expeditions of various descriptions. We've got sea-going journeys, and I'm sure we'll cover some versions of that. My versions of that being unusual, exciting and daring trips, and also some expeditions that cover up in the sky. And from my perspective, the Everest story is, and I'm looking at Lady Grills in the front row here. I had the privilege of organising a trip with Bear Grylls many years ago, and got a few images to share with you guys. So that's not Everest, but I was kind of inspired a little bit by the early adventurers of yesteryear, 1920s. The Brits started exploring Tibet and the Everest region. And I love this picture from the Royal Geographical Society archive of the 24 expedition outside having breakfast, I think it is. And I'm sure we'll come to a trip that I did a bit later. But Everest always featured. I had set myself initially a goal of climbing the 7 summits, the highest mountain on each continent, which of course, when you do that, you have to set foot on Everest and tick off the big one. So went there back in the mid-90s. Some images for you. Crossing the Khumbu Icefall, then going up in, this is May 96, unfortunately coincided with the worst storm in 100 years, which was a bit of a disastrous year. Many people lost their lives, many people injured to frostbite, and it was an unsuccessful year, of course. Many books and films written about this period, and I spent 2 days and nights struggling to stay alive at the South Pole in the death zone. But all good adventurers have a modicum of determination, resilience, and so went back in '98. And so a nice picture. I've ringed, you might not be able to see it, but those are the tents at the South Pole. So we're climbing the southeast ridge up towards the South Summit here in this image, and then obviously it's a short couple of hours to get to the main summit. Did eventually, with Lady Grylls' son, sit on the top of Everest with various paraphernalia. We did a little radio call to base camp, and I did utter the words. It wasn't planned, pre-planned. I think I said, "We've run out of Earth," which I thought was quite a good,
Yes.
quite a good sort of summary of our situation.
But what is it about the draw of Everest? I mean, nowadays it's a tour venue, isn't it, for some mountaineers?
I mean, it's a great sunbathing spot as well, apparently. I think the draw of Everest is universal. You know, people use it as an analogy for their own mountain, their own struggles in life. Of course, it's a beautiful place to go and visit. And from a physical, emotional, spiritual perspective, it's all encompassing. And I've just had the opportunity to
Well, you can get naked.
6 expeditions on Everest. So it wasn't just climbing. Great friend of mine, Glenn Shaw, he was born unfortunately with brittle bone disease, and his lifetime ambition was to see Everest. So I organised a trip to take him there, and we got a new world record for somebody in a wheelchair, which he was very pleased about. And this was the little subsidiary peak next to Everest that we dragged him up the top of. 20,000 feet, new world record for somebody in a wheelchair. And then back to Bear Grylls, we had an expedition. Actually, this was Bear's initiative and you're a pilot. Imagine flying a motorized parachute at 29,000 feet.
No.
Pretty daring mission. And Bear got the record for height, new world record for a paramotor, which is a motorized parachute. And this is, I think, him coming back into land. And then finally, last couple of my trips on Everest, going back to that initial 1920s breakfast outside, it was inspired me to do and look up the record for the highest black tie dinner party. As you do. Everyone likes a nice 3-course meal. So I recruited 2 Michelin-star chefs, Sat Baines from Nottingham, one of the world's best chefs, and he came out, and we did a little practice at base camp. He's in the white jacket there. Somebody who looks remarkably similar to, who does it look like? Richard Branson, don't you think?
It does, doesn't it? Yes.
I don't think it is, but altitude, your brain goes a bit haywire. I don't think he was with us, but no, this particular trip, 2015, unfortunately coincided with the awful earthquake on 25th of April. And so we didn't manage to have our highest world record breaking dinner party then, but I certainly had a good party at base camp before the earthquake.
You felt the earthquake as well on the
mountain?
mountain?
Oh yeah. No, I was 21,000 feet up the mountain. We were in a fortunate place just between camps on a glacier. And it was like 35 seconds of mayhem. Just the ground completely shaking. It was a bit like being on a travelator when you're with your luggage going up Heathrow Terminal 5 on the travelator, but except just in one direction. It was also going backwards and then sideways, if you can imagine that. It was quite extraordinary, and it took a few seconds to really work out what the hell was going on.
And you must have been looking up for avalanches.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There's big mountains everywhere, so that was probably one of the biggest dangers. But no, we were fortunate, right place at the wrong time.
Yes, indeed.
But we went back a couple of years later, and here's a new party of volunteers. There we are at base camp having another dinner. And then finally, we did actually get to the North Col, 7,000 meters, 23,000 feet. And I set out a breakfast lunch table. We had Guinness World Records insist that you have alcohol with your food. Now, you'll know that alcohol and altitude are not great bedfellows, but we had a modicum. We toasted the Queen and set out the table. Had a fabulous 3-course meal with wines, whiskey, and port. And then that was the dinner party at minus 25 degrees centigrade.
Minus 25.
Mild.
Not sure about the footwear for this. Well, fascination with Everest. I'm sure it continues with many people. And you've done it how many times?
6 expeditions to
6
Everest.
expeditions to Everest.
And I'm taking my family in December. Never too late to encourage the next generation.
It takes quite a while to acclimatise, doesn't it, with oxygen? So how long do you have to spend before you can really ascend to the top, or even halfway?
But I think the important thing is to acclimatise without the oxygen. And generally speaking, if you decide that you're going to climb Everest with oxygen, you go to Camp 3, which is about 25,000 feet. If you can acclimatise there and then plug in once you're on your summit bid, it certainly helps.
Because you've had some people who can't manage it. They've really suffered with lack of oxygen, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, we did have, before we had the successful trip, so I'd had the disaster in 96, back in 98, before the successful summit with young Bear Grylls, 23-year-old at the time. His best mate, Mick Crosswaite, was also with us. Bear and Jeffrey, my other 2 climbing mates, were ill with a chest infection, and they just simply weren't fit enough to go for the summit bid. And it's all dictated by the weather systems and the hurricane winds that lift in the jet stream. And so you get your weather window, and you've got to go. If you're not ready, or you're not organised, or you're not fit, or you're not well enough, then you unfortunately you missed the boat. And so Mick and I went for a summit bid mid-May. Jeffrey and Bear were back in base camp, and we went for it. And unfortunately, I was heading over the south summit and then leading. You climb individually, but with with a teammate. And I was forging ahead, looking towards the summit, and had the Hillary step in front of me, ploughing my own footprints in the southeast ridge there. And at some point, sixth sense. I knew something was wrong. I turned around and Mick wasn't with me. So there was only one decision to make, was to turn back, and went back over the lip of the south summit. And there he was lying prostrate in the snow, hardly breathing, and in big trouble. And at that point, I think the highest rescue was somewhere near the balcony, way further down. And so I realized that we, potentially in a bit of a pickle. But you don't, ex-military, you don't leave your teammates behind. And so my Sherpa and I, Pasang, we literally dragged Mick to his feet, and then spent quite a few hours staggering back down the mountain. And then unfortunately, one point in the introduction called Russian Roulette, I reveal the story of what happens next. But essentially, there's a bit of an incident, and Mick and the Sherpa, who are tied together, close haul rope, actually tumble and fall 1,000 feet down to Camp 4. It's a horrific moment. One unfortunately, it will be embedded in my psyche and brain forevermore. Miraculously, they escaped with their lives, both of them. So, yeah.
Yes.
Lucky.
You've had quite a few near misses.
Yeah, as you pointed out, I have a chapter right at the end called 9 Lives and How I Lost Them. And in fact, I'm not sure Everest actually makes the cut, which slightly leads me to believe I'm rather fortunate to be here with you in the glorious Isle of Wight.
Okay, let's come down to sea level then, but stay in the cold, the Antarctic.
Yeah, so Antarctica, a fantastic place. If you haven't already been, you must go before it melts. It's an extraordinary place. So you've got 7 summits. I sort of started ticking those off, the highest peaks on each continent. And then somebody mentioned there's a thing called the Explorer's Grand Slam, which is the 7 summits plus skiing to the North and the South Pole. So I thought, I'll have some of that in my every other holiday, do a little cold trip somewhere. So off we went to Antarctica, and This is the kind of typical sledging, what I call the Ranulph Fiennes scene of dragging a sled. Pretty miserable experience, if I'm honest, but wonderful environment to be in, of course, and a privilege to be there, skiing and pulling your sleds. We were only doing a short degree, or 60 miles, but I think it was enough to get the hang of it, don't you? And then when we got there, it's a lovely moment. You spend all this money getting to the South Pole. It's not cheap, ladies and gents. And what greets you is a nice signboard saying the South Pole and, you know, all the famous names. And then they give you an actual barber's pole with a very cheap, nasty sort of glitter ball on top, which is the actual South Pole. Of course, the pole is moving, so they just lift it up, and every week they lift it up and put it in the new geographically accurate place. And people like me, tourists, pop up and take our photograph, glinting in the ball that's on the top of the barber's pole. But I did think that it would be fun, Steve, to organise the first game of cricket ever to be played at the South Pole. All my expeditions, I like to try and think a little bit outside the box, hence unusual, exciting, or daring. And they all generally are raising money for a cause, a charity, or some such. And I think on this particular occasion, we were raising for various charities, but sponsored by the MCC, and they have a foundation, so we were raising a bit of money for them. And I organised with MCC gear, first game of cricket ever to be played at the South Pole. And I think I've got an image for you of England v the rest of the world. There is a Russian batsman who is more like a baseball player. We've got an Australian bowler and I think a Slovakian, butt come into bat. But it was a bit of fun. I made up a few extra rules. So like in normal cricket, you have a boundary, don't you? But, you know, we're 1,700 miles from the nearest pub. So for me, there was no boundary. It was unlimited. You had to run, which helped you keep warm. So I came up with some interesting rules of the game. Everyone had to bat and everyone had to bowl as well.
And who won?
England by 2 wickets. Come on.
Of course.
Those Australians weren't happy.
Well, that's the South Pole and the cold. Let's move on to something like bicycles. Well, penny farthing.
Yeah, so in my youth, I used to be captain of England bicycle polo, which might be new to you, but it was a thing, especially back in the 60s. Even Prince Philip used to play bicycle polo, and I got into that. And then as my years were advancing, I came up an opportunity to acquire some penny farthing bikes. And I thought they were intriguing Victorian velocipedes. And I kind of wondered whether I could ride a penny farthing, first of all. And then the second thought I had was, I wonder if you can play polo on penny farthings. And so being a man of action, I bought all the bikes here with great friend David Fox-Pitt. We were doing all sorts of shenanigans on our penny farthings over the last 10 years. Land's End to John O'Groats, I think we raised £26,000 for Mary's Meals charity, feeding kids in Africa. But that was quite sore bottom at the end of 900 miles to John O'Groats. But the great fun of the sport of penny farthing polo. Now, you won't have heard of it, but come and see us at Cowdray Park or Guards Polo Club. Every year we'll play a Calcutta Cup game, England v Scotland. I'm pleased to say England are winning in the series. And yes, as you can imagine, it's like polo, but on penny farthing Victorian bicycles.
Do you have to go and do the divots afterwards?
What could possibly go wrong?
Yes.
Invariably, somebody goes to hospital at each match, but generally not too serious.
And what's the score there?
I can't remember. This was, I think, 2015. I think myself and Fox-Pitt, whose brother Andrew, I think, is an inventor, are on the ball, challenging for the ball there. And I think England were triumphant on that particular occasion at Cowdray Park, Gold Cup Day.
And you say in the book that, in fact, it gets more of a crowd appeal than the normal polo.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, these events, as you can imagine, you've probably been to them. They're sponsored by some big brands. I think it was either this year or the year after at Cowdrey Park, sponsored by Verve Clicquot or somebody like that. They were absolutely furious on Monday morning because, like, page 5 of the Times or the Telegraph was a picture of us playing penny farthing polo, and what it should have been was the huge amounts of money they'd paid for the Argentinian polo players to be featured on a nice pony. But no, we stole their thunder, so they were absolutely livid.
That got you a good in, though, with some of the other companies, because you got coverage for them, yeah?
Yeah, we do. It's a weird thing when you ride a penny farthing, in Cowes or London or wherever, even Ukraine. You may have a question for me about that later, but in fact, I think we've got a picture of me in Ukraine 2 weeks ago with a penny farthing. It just brings a smile to people's faces. It's the most incredible thing I've discovered. You ride around with the top hat on a penny farthing, and people spontaneously break out into a smile or a laugh or a "what the hell's that?" or even their reaction is take a photograph or a bit of video, normally for social media these days.
I think you need a penny farthing trip around the island. That would be quite good.
Absolutely, yeah. Good idea. But this was a final picture of me in Ukraine. We did a little cycle challenge for a charity called Siobhan's Trust, which is serving pizzas to dislocated families in the east, the south, and different parts of Ukraine. It was my 3rd trip, and we were just doing a cycle ride from Odessa in the south to Chernobyl in the north. That's where the explosion of the nuclear thing. I'm still slightly shaking from the radiation. Don't get too close. But no, it was a good trip. A couple of weeks ago. Just got back.
So we've been up Everest a few times. We've been to the South Pole, and we've been up and down on a penny farthing, various places. That leaves the sea. What about the sea? What have you adventured on the sea?
Well, I know because we're in Cowes here.
Yes.
Thought I had to include a few images for you for seagoing ventures, and of course we cover a good few in the book. I segregate. The first half of the book is segregated geographical areas. So you've got mountains, oceans, deserts, jungle, expeditions, some charitable stuff, and some other mad dogs and Englishmen and things like that. So there's a modicum, I think 3 seagoing adventures. So this was one down in Antarctica. It's a Shackleton expedition. But the ones I thought I'd share with you, Steve, and the audience here, was firstly our UK and Ireland circumnavigation by jet ski. Now, I know we're in a sailing community here, and most of you will hate jet skis. So on reflection, I perhaps shouldn't have featured this particular story, but it was quite groundbreaking at the time. I remember the sales director of Yamaha, the leaders of jet skis at the time, when I came up with the plan of circumnavigating mainland Britain and then later Ireland on a jet ski. He said, absolutely impossible, you'll never do it. Of course, most people only spend 20 minutes darting around a harbour or just out offshore. Think about every day for 25 odd days, 8 hours a day on a jet ski. It's a different kettle of fish. So he didn't think it was possible, but nothing's impossible.
And you did it.
Yeah. This was back in 2000, again with Lady Grill's son and a few other chums. And then a few years later, I thought, well, we'd actually went across to Ireland on this particular trip, but we hadn't actually properly done and circumnavigated Ireland. So I put another expedition, this time with Sea-Doo jet skis. And one of my team members was a member of Her Majesty's Forces who'd had his leg blown off in Afghanistan. So he's the guy sat down in the front there, just one leg, his right leg's blown off, and he managed to jet ski all the way around Ireland with us, which was nice. And it was a collaboration with Help for Heroes, the charity, and we had a wonderful 2-week trip, plying our trade around Ireland. There was a slightly difficult moment at the end of the trip. We celebrated with champagne here in Belfast Harbour, and one of my 9 live stories actually is shortly after this picture was taken, because I must have had 1 or 2 sips too many
Oh, yeah.
champagne, and I was slightly light-headed, and we had a little bit of a race to go a mile down to the pickup point where we put the jet skis on the trailers. And unfortunately, yeah, I got a bit carried away and ended up ramming the harbour walls, you know, those jagged rock things, at about 70 miles an hour maybe. It wasn't pretty.
No.
But yeah, still here.
You survived.
That was one of my 9 lives gone there for sure.
Okay, so those are jet skis. What about paddle boards?
Well, I've got a little story for you that involves the Isle of Wight, because paddleboarding is one of the fastest growing sports in the world, I believe. And I started learning about 5 or 6 years ago, I think, and I had in mind to do a quite an adventurous trip, which we'll talk about in a second. But Isle of Wight is perfect for a training event. Paddleboarding around the island was fun because, you know, English speaking, nice cafes, the odd campsite, and I had a little support boat, so we were fed peanuts every hour, and we just paddleboarded around the island. It was wonderful. Well, obviously we had to look out the tides and sort that out, and the local weather patterns, but it was a fun and a successful trip and a good training mission, which was a precursor to quite an adventurous trip around Easter Island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which was somehow I dreamt up in the bath one day. So back in November 2017, I took a small team to attempt the first circumnavigation of Easter Island, which is off the Chilean coast, about 2,500 miles. So it's right in the middle of the Pacific. And this was a picture on the coast as we hugged it going around. But here's an image on the first hour of the first day, and it'll give you an indication if you could see that. So I'm not taking the photograph, but I'm probably one of those 2 there. You could just see 20-foot swells, and you imagine I'm a novice paddleboarder at this stage. Okay, I've paddleboarded around the Isle of Wight, but trying to stay on the board in 20-foot swells and choppy Pacific Ocean was quite challenging.
And volcanic shore as well, sharp.
Absolutely, yeah, very, very. In fact, we did a recce of the island before setting off. There was just one sandy beach on the whole 60-odd nautical mile circumnavigation. So, it was quite committing. And I remember going to chat to the Chilean Navy, and they said, "You're utterly lunatics." I come a long way to be a lunatic, so let us be lunatics, please. And they did, and off we went.
And paddleboarding is still...
Yeah, so paddleboarding is great for, up to my age and beyond. And this is a slightly more sedate version. I took a team to the wonderful Amazon jungle and river just last year, actually, and raising money for Prostate UK. And quite a few of my colleagues were of a certain age. You must get your PSA tested if you haven't already.
Yep. It's
quite important. I tell from experience, but it was a wonderful trip. It was 250-kilometer paddleboard of a tributary of the Amazon, which nobody had done before, and pretty remote, and a really special, wonderful, reflective, emotional trip.
Staying on the sea then, and staying on the water, we're going to cover a failure now.
Yeah.
You've had a few.
I have.
Not many. But this one involves something quite local, really. An ice bath from the mainland to the Isle of Wight.
Yeah.
What gave you that idea?
Well, I think, to be honest, it wasn't necessarily my idea. I do like unusual modes of transport. And I think and these things normally start in a pub or a bar, as you can imagine, a restaurant if you're lucky. Yes. If you've had a good month at work, it can be in a restaurant. But generally over a beer, it's what should we do next? You'll know this, everyone will know this happens. And I said, why don't we paddle something across the channel or an ocean? I'd done various channel crossings. And my friend John Bezick, who's an architect, said, why don't I design a bath made of ice? Bath made of ice. And I kind of queried, asked him a few technical questions, not that technical, not very intelligent. So he said, I can make us an ice bath. So we ended up attempting to cross the Solent in an ice bath, which looks like that. It's all wrapped up in wooden things. And my mate Toby, who's an engineer, said, I'll tell you straight away before we launch at this stage whether you're going to succeed or not. I said, how come? He got his drill out and he stuck the drill in, did a drill, and it started peeing out water. Said, you're not going to make it, Neil, before we'd even launched the damn thing. So he was quite right. We lasted about 2 minutes before the thing disintegrated. But being of good military stock, planning and preparation, I had foreseen said disaster and embarrassment. You can see we've got the world's media on the beach at Alverstoke, I think it was.
Leon Solent, yes.
Yeah, just across the way. And the plan B was a standard bath. It was a black one, but other than that, it was a pretty ordinary bathtub, which I'd strapped some sort of boat fenders to and really hoped for the best. I hadn't tested it, but I knew it would save blushes in the event of ice bath failure. And so John, who's in front there, is leading us off across the Solent in a bathtub. And whilst we were paddling across about 1 mile per hour, for those who are interested in trying it afterwards this next summer. You do have to watch out for the shipping.
They do.
But 4.5 hours later, we reached the Isle of Wight in our bathtub.
Well, there are extenuating circumstances there because the ice bath actually didn't have enough freezing time, did it?
Yes. Yeah, that was the main, well, according to architect John, who obviously will never hear the end of it, as far as I'm concerned, to my dying day. He will, in fact, at a speech I'll have to give next week, he'll relive his embarrassing moment of designing, as an architect, a failing ice bath. But yeah.
It's a challenge
it's just one of those things.
It's a challenge to be taken up yet then, still.
I know, but I mean, even Richard Branson has failures, right?
Yes. Okay, staying on the water and talking about a failure, kayaking and the Bering Sea, which is a bit of a low point.
Yeah, I haven't got any photographs for you, but that was an attempt to cross the Bering Sea in winter, walking and sledging. If anyone's been up there, it's a pretty harsh environment, and there's not many people who've walked or skied across in winter. And my friend and I, James Bingham, decided that we'd have a go at it, and just got into awful trouble. It was one of those years, 2016, February. As we learned later, it was the warmest Arctic season on record, which was my excuse for the failure. But essentially what happened was we attempted to cross the 50-odd mile strait between northwest Alaska and the Russian mainland. And there just wasn't any sea ice. There wasn't any pack ice. And we'd banked on there being the pack ice so you could make the ground by hauling. And we had 9-foot kayaks, which, for the watery sections we knew we would need.
Sit on top ones.
Just sit on top of these little 9-foot kayaks with your gear next, sat on your gear, sat on top of a 9-foot flat kayak essentially. And they would also act as our skiing sled, but walking and hauling them behind you on a harness. That was the plan. And I think it was a sensible plan for that environment, but unfortunately there was no pack ice. And so what happened was we paddled 15 hours off the Alaskan coast in the direction, but of course the tide was raging about 5 knots, and you can't kayak a 9-foot paddle board, if you like, that speed. And so we drifted towards the North Pole, towards the Russian, demarcation zone, and soon to be out of help of any rescue services. So I did what every coward does. I picked up the satellite phone and called for help. And luckily, the US Coast Guard answered the call, and they came get us. Okay.
Well, that's seaborne ventures. There's only one element kind of left, and that's in the air. So paragliding, I guess that you took to the air very early in your military training with parachute jumps and things. But
yeah, loads of parachute jumps. So familiar with jumping out of aircraft, but no, like you love the air, as do I. I'm a pilot of various machines, and you know, if you're gonna lead a life of adventure, you can't just do it by sea, by land. You've got to get up into the air. And so yeah, the next section, if you like, and there's a number of hopefully entertaining, engaging, and interesting stories about flying various contraptions. Incidentally, this was a lockdown experience in a vintage Spitfire, upside down over Littlehampton. It was amazing. Not cheap, but an amazing experience. But the first was a short and sharp trip to what we called the Lost World in Venezuela. So the Amazon jungles of Venezuela. And we were just starting out on our journey to learn how to fly motorized paragliders. This was another failure, actually. It was difficult conditions. We were attempting to fly over and above Angel Falls, which was the highest waterfall in the world, the most spectacular place to be. We did get to see it in a light aircraft, but we didn't quite get there with our paramotors. But it was a fascinating journey to a really remote part of the world.
Beauty of a paraglider, of course, is it's a little small pack. I mean, you can take it more or less hiking anywhere, can't you?
Yeah, like a paraglider without an engine, except that you've got a backpack with a propeller, a sort of two-stroke or sometimes a four-stroke engine on your back, and it propels you into the air. And yeah, conditions were pretty dire, though. I remember the winds were just horrific, actually. You can travel about 30 miles an hour, 35 miles an hour if you're lucky with these contraptions. But we would often find in this part of the world that the katabatic winds off the mountains, the Tepui in Conan Doyle's Lost World in Venezuela, were so strong that they could be up to 60 miles an hour. And on one occasion, I remember coming into land at doing 15 miles an hour backwards. Terrifying. I bet you've not done that in your glider.
No, I haven't. But you can fly with a trike with those, which enables you to perhaps take a second person who isn't necessarily fully able.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the expeditions are hopefully for good causes, and one of my affiliations and collaborations has been with Health for Heroes, and being ex-military, of course, I do try and help the community, particularly the wounded soldiers. And so this was another expedition, 2014, which we called Flying for Heroes. So it was taking wounded soldiers, those PTSD suffering as well. My navigator was a chap called Cale Royce, who had both his legs blown off in Afghanistan 2012, I think it was. And literally 2 years later, he's flying a paratrike, two-seater flying contraption through Kenya, following the Rift Valley. So there he is on the left-hand side, double amputee. He had damage to his arms and his head as well. He was declared dead 8 times in theatre. So just extraordinary. Some of these guys are extraordinary. And you know, literally 2 years later, he's rode the Atlantic, and he's my navigator in Kenya on this amazing sort of contraption that will take 2 people. And flying the Rift Valley in Africa is just stunning. Really, 1,000 kilometers. We started at Mount Kilimanjaro in the south and flew north to Mount Kenya. Just a stunning trip. And of course, raising money for other future wounded soldiers at Help for Heroes.
Great cause. Going back a bit, actually, your earlier paramotoring, I suppose you'd call it, was the challenge of a flying car, which uses a paraglider wing.
Yeah, I suppose when you fly paragliders, hang gliders, paratrikes, and various other things, you think, what next? What else can one learn to try out? And so, after fixed wing and helicopter experiences, I thought, what next? And it was actually after the Mission Everest with the paramotors that a very clever young man called Giles Cardozo works in Dorset, said to me in the tent, we were having a cup of tea after Mission Everest with young Bear Grylls. In fact, he was a little older then, but Bear kept very quiet on this particular occasion. Giles said, and I quote, "Neil, I think I can now design and build the world's first road legal flying car." And I thought, that sounds interesting. How much was the question I asked.
Yes.
And I had to take at least 2 sips of tea to recover from the answer. Tell you a secret, it was £150,000. And I had no clue how I was going to get the money, but I reached across, shook his hand and said, "I shall be your first customer." What on earth compelled me and possessed me to say that, I don't know to this day, but once committed, a commitment's a commitment, and I became the proud owner of the world's first road legal flying car. What I did know, Steve, was that I had to put on an audacious maiden flight / journey in order to recover the costs and get some sponsorship. So I decided that we would do, and here's a picture of us. This was the very first flight on Pendine Sands in Wales. But it was a precursor to an extraordinary journey, probably my signature journey, covered in chapter 3, Deserts, I think, where we did London to Timbuktu in a flying car and crossing the Sahara Desert in the process. It was a fabulous journey. Started promoting it at Festival of Speed at Goodwood. This was in the New Technology Centre in 2008. There's the flying car with a 5-bladed propeller. It had a 1000cc, I think, Yamaha R1 Yamaha engine, motorbike. Had great power to weight ratio. And this was part of our journey. I had hell of a nightmare trying to cross various oceans. Obviously, there's the English Channel and the Straits of Gibraltar. 9 lives and how I lost them should have been in one of these, but again, it didn't make the cut. But I ditched in the sea on one attempt and very nearly ended up in and under at the bottom of the sea on a second attempt, but fortunately the third attempt was successful. We made it across to North Africa, and then of course it was a wonderful 2,000-kilometre journey crossing the Sahara Desert from north to south with a support team. We had a truck with all the food and fuel. We had KTM motorbikes in support. I had this vision of engine out and then ploughing into a rather large sand dune and never to be seen again. So I had scouts out with the KTMs checking my progress. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful mission. And coming in towards Timbuktu, towards a 46-day journey non-stop without a day off. Yeah, it was a good trip.
Well, in all these adventures, we talk about 9 lives. One actually I wanted to talk about that you lost was at Kuta Beach and really just going swimming.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, you never know when life will deal you a dodgy blow. And, you know, whilst some of you might be thinking you're a bit of a daredevil doing all these things, actually, it's the simplest things. You can be run over by a number 9 bus. You can unfortunately pick up a nasty, disease, cancer or whatever else. Got to live life to the full is my belief. But on this particular occasion, I was climbing a mountain in Irian Jaya, Indonesia. Innocent cut. I snagged my lower leg on a sharp rock. An inch gash, nothing much. I sort of patched up as best I could. Finished the expedition. Went swimming in Kuta Beach in Bali for a bit of a jolly, and then collapsed in the restaurant that night from blood poisoning. Doctor was called, given some antibiotics. I thought, okay, I finished the antibiotics, and I also nearly drowned in Kuta Beach. I forgot to mention, but
I was going to say
I didn't realise that at the time. But anyway, the more serious thing was catching sepsis, septicemia. And being an ignorant middle-aged man, I thought the drugs would do the trick. Went back to London, went back to work, and about a week later, my leg blew up like an elephant, elephantitis, literally. And I took myself off to Tooting General Hospital, and the nurse doctors said, you left that another hour and you'd be dead, mate. So yeah, the most innocent swimming in a holiday resort can be your demise. So watch out.
Well, as the leader of many of these expeditions, you've had to deal with people of various kinds, and amputees, and also perhaps underprivileged children. One of the bits in the books I was very impressed with was just the kind of interpersonal skills that you acquire, and Devil's Children was something we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so that was a lovely trip. I've been for 10 years working with a charity called British Exploring Society, who have a rich history of helping develop young people. But when in 2005, the then executive director of the charity BES called me up, and we had a coffee, and he said, you know, we've been doing these amazing trips for young people for whatever it was, 80 years, but it's principally for public school educated kids, you know, well-off kids. And I have a feeling we ought to be offering it to the disadvantaged and so forth. And I couldn't agree more. And I said I would run their program for disadvantaged kids. And so we ran a program for, you know, West London kids and kids who lived in the state, all NEETs, not in education and so forth. And, you know, it was a great success. And one of the trips, the training course led to an expedition, of course. And so every year I took the 40 or 50 of these kids off on a wild adventure, Norway, Sweden, Iceland. And on one occasion, 2012 or 13, we did a double crossing of the Sinai Peninsula desert. And on the second night, two girls got into a hell of a scrap from different parts of the neighborhood. And yeah, it was really unfortunate. And we had some wonderful Bedouin support, you know, helping us get across the desert safely. And one of them came up to me afterwards and said they honestly thought with this scrap and the big, you know, hoo-ha that had gone on that the expedition would be over. And I said, no. We'll carry on. We'll sort it out. Separated the girls, sorted out some, you know, some PR. And then one of the Bedouins said to me afterwards, they said, these friends of yours, Neil, Mr. Neil, they're like shayateen. I said, what the hell does shayateen mean? He said, the devil's children. But we successfully did a double crossing with disadvantaged kids across the Sinai Peninsula.
One bit from the book. During our enforced regular 10-minute breaks, this is on the Sahara, I invented a new game called Colgate Russian Roulette. Yes. Actually, Russian roulette, it plays in my mind quite a lot, actually, because it's obviously a 1 in 6 chance of a disaster. But on this particular occasion, I think it was, yeah, anyway, I invented this game called Colgate Roulette or Colgate Russian Roulette. Essentially, when the team are slightly itchy, bored, waiting for something to do or, you know, go up the mountain or whatever else, you stand in a line, or normally on a busy road, tarmac road, and you wait for these big heavy trucks to come by. And we'd all be standing there like this, soldiers on the edge of the road, you know, on the sidewalk, and I'd lob a Colgate toothpaste, you know, one of those plastic tubes of toothpaste into the line of the wheels of the truck. And of course, as it goes by, the thing absolutely explodes like a shotgun. And, you know, half a kilogram of toothpaste gets shot in a particular random direction. And it's that 1 in 6 chance of being killed by some toothpaste. Well, finally, Neil, you mentioned Ukraine a little bit earlier, but actually you went off and did quite a lot of help there for the Ukrainians. Yeah, so pieces. What happened there was I was actually in Russia, in Siberia, in February, March of last year, as the Russians decided to invade Ukraine. And
obviously, we had an interesting journey getting out of Russia at the time, a week or so after the invasion, but I was just compelled to go and do something to help. So I literally took my expedition team. We arrived back in Heathrow, eventually via Dubai, very expensive, 10 times the cost to get back. And then I said, let's go and do something to help. And as it happened, a great friend of mine, David Foxpitt, the captain of, it's all interrelated, the captain of Penny Farthing Scotland bicycle polo, had taken out his pizza making machine and was on the border with Poland and Ukraine in those first weeks, and we went out and helped. That charity, Siobhan's Trust, now has 10 pizza trucks with 6 ovens in each pizza truck, and it's delivering 3,500 pizzas a day to distressed and displaced Ukrainian families. So recently, my 3rd trip to Ukraine, I was doing some pizza making near the front line, but also riding the Penny Farthing, as you already discovered, just to help raise some profile awareness, which is the worst thing at the moment. Fatigue, people are forgetting about Ukraine, and they're still desperate, they're still in need, and they need our help and support, but also to raise some money. Mad Dogs and Englishmen, I think you cover it under.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you could have heard, it's a fascinating read, unbelievable, a lot of it, especially as he's standing here and not limping up here or whatever. But there must be 1 or 2 questions from the floor, so if anyone wants to ask a question, just wait for the microphone, if you can just hang on 1 second, if that's okay. And I hope it's not to join one of his expeditions.
Yes, nice. Is that right? You've called your book Adventureholic. Is it an addiction, do you think? Are you a little bit crazy?
Good question.
Yeah, very good question. So yeah, I think probably one needs a catchy title for a book, and it's probably the only book I will ever write, ladies and gents. So it's now or never. But yes, it's a bit of a pun on alcoholism and addiction. My version of that, I've never taken drugs. I do drink, like a drink, but I think there is a thing called Adventureholic, and I've probably got it, and I've trademarked it, so it's now a thing. There we are.
I've had a few walks up the west coast of Great Britain. I've not done anything like that. I just wonder if it all came to a halt tomorrow, for you, I'm thinking about, I can see the publicity and the fun and the whiz-bang. Any spiritual experiences for you which keep you going, keep you doing the next one?
Yeah, I mean, I am a Roman Catholic, slightly lapsed and not as good a Roman Catholic as I'd like, but I think in these special places, halfway up Everest or at the South Pole, you do have moments where you can reflect on the bigger picture of life, and it's one of the beautiful things I'm sure you discovered whilst doing your walks up the west coast, and a beautiful trip that must have been. You get these moments where you can reflect and look up at the stars and just wonder and appreciate what you have. And I think that's the time where I find peace and tranquility, and if there is such a thing as a God, that's where I find the presence of a higher being.
In all those adventures you've had, which was the favourite?
That's almost an impossible question to answer.
Yes.
When you've organised and led 50 plus expeditions around the world, honestly, I don't think I can answer that question. I mean, I think for sure the flying car expedition was the most harebrained and dangerous. Everest was probably one of the toughest and hardest. Most enjoyable, probably helping those kids and wounded soldiers, the most do-gooding expeditions. For me, the most enjoyable, if I had to pick one, probably the Amazon River paddleboarding mission. just because we were going to such a special place on the planet, which, you know, another 50, 100 years may look very different. And it's such an important environment. Just with obviously it's just the geography, what you're doing, who you're raising money for, but also just the people as well that you encounter when you travel and you do these things in different and special places around the planet. And it's a great privilege.
Any more questions? Yes, there's one here.
Yes. So, like for example, Ukraine, it's impossible. We took a van in with supplies. I had the bikes in the back. Had important people on the team. Couldn't insure any of them in Ukraine. But I think you've got a picture at the moment that to be an adventurer, you have to take some risks. And one of the risks of going to Ukraine recently in the last year and a half is that you can't personally cover yourself or your van or your bike or anything else, and you take a bit of a risk. Flying car, I couldn't get any insurance for that. So, also the wounded soldiers in Kenya, we had lots of insurance, but just the smallest thing. So we lost our emergency ballistic parachutes from each of the 3 trikes that I'd bought. They were impounded in customs. We were on a tight deadline. What the hell do you do? Do you abandon the whole trip? Really difficult moments. I mean, literally, it would have been a manslaughter charge had any of the soldiers died in a trike that me or one of my teammates were piloting during that 3-week expedition. But I took a huge risk. I did tell people, obviously, that we had no ballistic emergency parachutes, and it was a voluntary decision. But as far as the MOD concerned, I'd be in prison now if somebody had died on that trip. So you take these risks. It's all part of judgment, good decision making or bad decision making, and having a bit of lady luck on your side.
Okay, one more last question just back here. Wait for the microphone. Thank you.
How do you encourage young people to be adventurous?
So I try and, I really enjoy going to talk to young people, and whether it's in Ukraine or a public school in the Isle of Wight. All I try and do is encourage them to have an adventurous mindset. It's very simple, because I think with an adventurous mindset, and you don't have to go off and climb Everest and scale mountains or cross oceans or indeed fly a car across the Sahara Desert. There are many forms of adventure, but the principle of having an adventurous mindset is being open to opportunities, to grab your chances in life. And I think some principles like being curious and courageous, being energetic and enthusiastic, and then also resourceful and resilient are some really key life lessons that if we can practice and improve our skills in those areas, it sets us up and sets young people up for life.
Well, Neil, thank you very much for telling us all about the book. Adventureholic, can't recommend it enough. It's well worth buying. You can buy it in the library, and then afterwards can have a chat with Neil over in the cafe for a chat. Do let Neil go first, if that's okay. But ladies and gentlemen, Neil Laughton,
Thank you very much.
Adventureholic.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.